So what we're going to do today is talk about the UC Atlas of Global Inequality. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about giving a sense of the mission or the vision. Suresh Lodha, one of my colleagues from computer science, will talk a bit introducing a number of people talking about the capabilities of our atlas. And then I'm going to talk a bit more about some projects we have planned. And finally, we're going to talk about a conference which we're organizing for December. The project is really a student-based project that's trying to map global inequality in order to help illuminate the processes and the causes of global inequality. Let's go. Do we have this first one? Yes. So it's a combination of visualization, mapping, summarizing research, and trying to explain the background to some of the issues involved in global inequality. Google has recently acquired Gapminder, which we think is an amazing piece of work, amazing set of animations. We've not tried anything quite as ambitious as that, though we're learning from Gapminder. What we're trying to do is to provide an introduction illuminating inequality for intermediate users, students, journalists, maybe some researchers, maybe some policymakers. The atlas has been built through student labor, so it's a bit variable. But we think we've got a pretty good scheme, and you'll be hearing some of the students talking about the project as we go along. The project is backed by 6 of the 10 campuses of the UC system, which means that we have an advisory board and some input from several other campuses. But an awful lot of the work gets done at UC Santa Cruz. Hopefully that will change over time. So we're going to go through some of the features. Before we do that, I'm just going to mention a couple of interesting little insights emerging from the Atlas work. Here's an early graph of the sort that Gapminder has animated, of gross domestic product along the bottom, life expectancy up the side. What we're interested in is that we can show some shed some light on some of the outliers. So there are interesting outliers on both sides. Sri Lanka and China have life expectancies way above what you would expect for their level of economic development. We're pretty sure this is because of a history of public action that reduced inequality, land reforms and food subsidy programs, food support programs, and state anti-poverty programs. At the same time, outliers on the other side, Brazil and South Africa, are very easily explicable as being high inequality countries, with governments, in the case of Brazil, not implementing anti-poverty programs. In the case of South Africa at this time, 1980, implementing what we could call poverty programs, creating poverty. Another little bit from another graph from the early stages of the Atlas, which is online in our health section. This is a graph of life expectancy. That's the blue bars, ranking the countries with the highest life expectancy. This is in 2000. And then we overlaid healthcare costs. And what's interesting about that is the adjacent appearance of the United States and Cuba, showing with virtually the same life expectancy and being at more or less extremes of healthcare spending per capita. And it confirms, at first we thought this was just a statistical artifact. It doesn't seem as though it is. It seems that the life expectancy figures from Cuba are perfectly okay, they're robust, and that the Cuban healthcare system does indeed provide very adequate healthcare at extremely low cost compared to the US. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Suresh Loda, who's going to talk about introducing the atlas as a whole.
Okay, so I'm Suresh Lodha, and I'm teaching a graduate class this quarter at Santa Cruz on computer graphics. So some of my students are going to actually make this presentation. So what we are going to do is to give you a brief tour of the website of the UC Atlas of Global Inequality and introduce you to the various features that we support. So this presentation will be supported by Prabhat Gunawardane, Jack Feng, Mike Patterson, A.D. Chandra, and some members of the UC Atlas team that has been working with Ben Crow, introducing you to the blog. So what we are going to do is to introduce you to these 5 features of the UC Atlas. We support various themes, much beyond income inequality, and then a tour of interactive maps that you can generate using the UC Atlas, and some work on specific country pages, and then interactive database will be presented by Eddie. And finally, a discussion of blocks, which encourages debates by Anita and Ellen. So with that, I will invite Prabhat to start this presentation. Let me switch to the web. Yeah, I will get to that. Yeah, I'll get to a URL.
Thanks, Suresh. So I will just take you guys through a brief overview of the themes available in UC Atlas and the main maps that I used here. So as you can see on the left-hand side, you get like 6 main themes that UC Atlas focuses on: health, income inequality, gender, economic globalization, connections, and inequality, of course. So just let's take a look at a couple of visualizations available. So if you take life expectancy, we have life expectancies for each region, each country. And in this map, the purple shows low life expectancy, and the dark green is, of course, high. And if you move forward through the decades, you can see that as a global trend, life expectancy is, of course, increasing. But the exception is, of course, in sub-Saharan Africa, due to HIV epidemic in the last decade, from 1990 to 2000, life expectancy has actually decreased. So let's take another look at the causes of death. So if you look at the developed regions and developing regions, this basically shows that there's a much, very big difference in what actually causes people's deaths, as in communicable diseases are the most prominent cause of death in developing regions, as opposed to non-communicable diseases. And well, at the same time, I'm trying to show you all the graphs that are available currently in UC Atlas 2. So there's this radar graph, which shows a more specific, detailed view of what are the actual causes of death. And the blue line shows the average for the world for each specific category. And say if you were to compare Western Europe, which is indicated by this yellow line, you can see that most of the deaths are due to cardiovascular diseases and malignant neoplasms. And on the other hand, you can see a heavy bias towards infectious diseases and respiratory diseases in this orange line, which actually represents sub-Saharan Africa. So using a particular kind of graph, this particular radar graph in this instance, can make it really easy to visualize what's happening in a particular region as opposed to some other parts of the world. So, okay. So UC Atlas also has information on global trade flows. So this particular map shows trade coming in and out of each region. And the size of these arrows indicate the amount of exports, the blue arrows, and the imports in the red arrows. So if you take Japan, for example, you can see there's a massive amount of exports going into the United States, as well as coming back, imports coming back from states. Okay, and finally, I'm just going to show a graph on the global use of internet and computer usage, something we're all familiar with. So yeah, at the beginning of the 90s, of course, it was almost non-existent. But globally, of course, number of internet users is growing exponentially. But at the same time, the growth itself is not universally equal. This is in 2001. The number of internet users in North America is per 100 users, 61%, whereas in South Asia, it was 1 user for every 200 people. So another interesting fact about Easy Global Atlas is that in addition to the just presenting data, just visualizing data, there's also under each team quite a generous description about what causes those differences and what the actual indicators mean. Okay, and with that, I'm actually going to hand over to Mike, to talk about individual countries and their differences.
Thanks, Prabha. Okay, the country pages provide a unified access to global inequality data for more than 200 countries, and it uses about 60 indicators. Over decade intervals from the years 1960 to 2000. And this data is visualized using bar charts and time series graphs, and it also uses, and you can also compare with other countries using bar charts and tables. So if we're interested in how New Zealand did during those years, we navigate to that country, and we're given some overview text, and we're also given a bar chart of some health indicators for the year 2000. And we can see that for life expectancy, the New Zealand ranks 18th out of 196 countries that were polled. And for infant mortality, they ranked 165th out of 191 countries polled. And groups of indicators are divided into categories that are accessible on the left-hand side. We're going to check out population and migration. And you'll see that we're given a new bar chart with some indicators that are relevant to this category. And we're also given a table of indicators that shows the actual data points. We can graph this data by clicking on the link. And for this one, we can see that New Zealand's steadily becoming more urbanized as time goes on. And you can also see that the world in the blue line is following a similar trend. Okay. And finally, we can compare this data with other countries by selecting some of the indicators that we're interested in. And then selecting a country. We'll check out Japan. And you can see that now Japan has been interleaved into the indicator rows, shown right there. And the bar chart's been updated with side-by-side comparisons of New Zealand and Japan. And now I'll turn over the mic to Eddie to discuss the interactive databases.
Jack.
Oh, excuse me, Jack.
Hi, I'm now going to talk about the interactive maps functionality of the site. Okay, so from the home here, you go to Inequality and Growth. And then you follow the link on main database. And there's a link on the top here to make a map. So let's try an arbitrary indicator now. So basically, you can choose one from one of the main indicators and from one of the years ranging from 1960 to 2000. Okay, so Here it shows a global inequality map, which compares different countries over one single indicator in a specific year. And this map uses a pseudo-coloring scheme, which associate each one of the country to one of the 6 colors as defined in the legend, where white represents no data, and from the green to red represents from the smallest value to the largest value of indicators. And the user can choose to change either one of the indicator or the year or both, and the map will be updated interactively. So that's we can notice that there's a lot of internet users in the United States and not so many in China. So let's see how it does in 2000. So here the indicator is remain constant and the year has changed. And you can see there's a large increase in internet user in China over the 5-year span from 1995 to 2000. And also you can keep the year constant and try to compare with another indicators. So let's try mobile phone users. So here's a map updated again accordingly. So the user can also perform more comparison between indicators and year, and the map will be updated interactively. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Eddie to talk about the interactive database.
So thanks, Jack. So hi, everyone. I'm Eddie Chandra. I'm a first-year graduate student. I'm doing my master at the UCSC. I will be going to talk about the UC Atlas database. To go to the database, we just follow the database link right here. So the UC Atlas database provides 3 outputs based on the information that we're interested in. They are data table, line graph, or bar graph. The steps are broken into 5. The first step, we choose the area that we're interested. On the left side, we can see that the area are grouped into countries, and then geographic region, economic region, or it lists everything. So you can either scroll and choose the area that you want, or you can type the name of the area if you know in this box. So I will go ahead with choosing United States. And then I will go over Canada. And Japan. Okay, so the next step is we choose the indicator, and they also group into economic, education, gender, health, population, technology and media, or everything. So let's say we are interested in the birth rate, and that should be in the health category, and we click the right arrow. And then the third step is the data years. They can be by decade, every 5 years, or yearly. And it began from 1960 up to 2000. The first step is relevant only if you want your output as a data table. So what we're looking here is the row of the table can be by country, by indicator, or by years. And we can sort the data ascending or descendingly on which year and on which indicator. For now, we only have one, which is the birth rate. So we'll go and submit the query. So here we are looking at the data table. The row are country, as we specified before, and one of the column, which is 1960, are sorted ascendingly, and for the birth rate data. We can also download the data as an Excel file for our own purpose. Let's see how the bar graph will look like. So here, what we're looking is the horizontal axis are country, and the vertical axis are the birth rate data. And the color represent the year for the data. So it starts from 1960 up to 2000. The UC Atlas database also provide a way to have more than one indicator. So if you're interested, let's say in economic, and we choose the trade indicator, and I want maybe just on a particular year, you can also do that. So I'll choose 1990, and we'll do a line graph instead. Okay. So what we're seeing here is the row. I mean the horizontal axis are the same, our country. The left vertical axis showing the birth rate data, and the right vertical axis is showing the trade data. And the black line is showing the birth rate data for each country, and the blue line is showing the trade data for each country. So the UC Atlas database is very easy to use and powerful, and that's all I can say about it. And the next topic, Alan and Anita are going to talk about the weblog of the UC Atlas database. The UC Atlas.
Thanks. So my name's Anita. I'm an undergraduate student along here with Ellen. If you want to share.
Hi, my name is Ellen, and I'm a third-year undergraduate UCSC sociology major.
Oh, right. I'm a fourth-year history and history of visual art and culture major. What we're going to talk about are the blogs, which we're going to get up here pretty soon. We're going to go over why we blog, what we blog, and the process that it takes to develop what we're blogging, and like choosing, and then the peer editing process. And then Ellen's going to go over an example, hopefully technology willing. So basically, why we blog is to encourage debate and awareness among the community that we're trying to reach through the UC Atlas. And unlike other atlases of this sort, our goal is to engage academic and a scholarly audience, although it's open for everyone, obviously. So we're looking to engage students, professors, researchers to, take a look at this huge amount of information that we have. And what the blog provides is a context in which you can see this information. So we look at articles from the UNDP publications, the World Development Reports. We have a number of journals that we consistently monitor for relevant articles that we might want to cover. For example, I just did one on the Journal of Economic Inequality, which looked at regional versus country-specific poverty. And our goal is to get articles that are relevant to the way that poverty can be seen globally. So we want things that fall within the range of our themes. We went through some of them are gender, health, connectedness, for example. And what we want are also unique articles that aren't necessarily repetitive, because there's tons of articles out there on globalization. What we want are ones that are bringing up new ideas that may not have been discussed before. So just going back to the example of the one that I most recently did, we were looking at region-specific poverty, which is something that the Atlas hasn't really gone into too much because we mainly look at poverty based throughout countries as opposed to urban versus rural, etc. Now, Ellen's going to tell us more about the process that we go through.
Well, oftentimes we meet weekly and we meet to discuss what articles we believe are relevant, and then we assign people to read various articles, and then afterwards we spend time to summarize them and summarize key points that, again, would be easy for intermediate users, such as undergraduate students or just journalists. We try to see if they have both unique and relevant concepts to what we want to offer to the UC Atlas. And as you can see above here, we have different themes of economic globalization, gender health, income inequality, and region inequalities. And then I guess I'll go over an example of one that I wrote personally about the world distribution of household wealth by Davies, Sandstrom, Shorrocks, and Wolf. I try to begin by summarizing the key points, and oftentimes we look for things that have good visualizations. As you can see, this one has various comparisons of countries in bar graph form. And I just list a lot of easy bullet points. And such as this graph, which is showing different wealth across different regions between rich and poor countries. And I think that by doing this, this makes it a lot easier for us to help them understand, us to help our intermediate users understand global inequality. And we link our sources here. And we also allow users to comment on what we have blogged. And so we make it very interactive. So.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, thank you. Good. You get us back. Okay, what I want to do in the remaining 10 minutes or so is to talk about first about, thank you, some projects we have which are not yet online, but which we think are important. So I'm going to talk about two projects. One's on the environment. One is on poverty and understanding the causes of poverty. So one of the things we did early on in thinking about the environment was to map two views of environmental sustainability. We took a standard one, which is the ecological footprint, which measures the amount of land particular cities or countries or societies use. Then we took a more recent one produced by Yale and Columbia universities called the Environmental Sustainability Index. This is an aggregate of around 70 different variables, including pollution, resource use, vulnerability, and governance of the environment. These are the maps we found. So what the blue is high sustainability, the yellow is low sustainability. This suggests that the industrialized world cannot be sustained, but the third world or the non-industrial world can. This is the ecological footprint. If you look at the Environmental Sustainability Index, it's almost the reverse. So most of the, again, blue is highly sustainable, low sustainability is yellow. And what this suggests is the industrialized world, with the exception of the US and a few other places, is sustainable. But the non-industrialized world, particularly Africa and Asia, is not sustainable. So what's happening here? What we think is that the ecological footprint is really overlooking human creativity, whereas the Environmental Sustainability Index, by default rather than by choice, has included some indicators of human capacity to modify the relation to the environment. What this suggests is the need to situate these different views on the continuum of contemporary views. And essentially, we can do this on a continuum between optimism and doom. And to go through this simply, there is technological optimism. The people that George Bush particularly likes to listen to fall into this category. There is environmental managerialism, which is the common way in which international meetings and governments think about the environment. Both of these are subject to the limitation that they assume a technological determinism, that social change is largely determined by an autonomous technological change. Very common in academia and elsewhere is Malthusian pessimism, which assumes that humans are the same as animals and face similar crises. And then again, particularly in Santa Cruz, there is a deep green pessimism, which says we all have to go back and live on the land. Now, these suffer from a problem that they apply concepts from ecology directly to humanity. Neither of these assumptions of technological determinism or naturalistic reductionism do we think are actually applicable. One of the main reasons why the assumption that we're the same as animals doesn't apply is that humans are different. Humans have what some people call emergent powers. Our ability to speak and our ability to coordinate and our ability to reflect upon what we do, all of those things make us different from even the most advanced animals. As a result, we think that there's a reality ahead on the environment which goes in between this range of different positions of thinking about human relationship to the environment. And we think that the Environmental Sustainability Index, again, though they didn't do it consciously, is managing to negotiate between the two extremes of doom and optimism and between the fallacies of technological determinism and naturalistic reductionism. As a result, our project is to think about how the world is changing in relation to the turning points and human creativity that is being released across the world. So here, for example, is a mapping of energy intensity. It's quite a famous graph produced by two very important third world environmentalists back in the 90s. And there are two things. What this is showing is energy intensity, which means the amount of energy used per unit of economic output. And what we see is hopeful. It's not actually a complete picture. It's not energy use, which continues to climb in all these places. But what it's showing is that as successive industrial revolutions have occurred, they've occurred with a lesser peak of energy intensity. And after each peak, those societies have tended to reduce the energy intensity of their manufacturing. As I say, overall energy use rises, but what this suggests is that it's possible to do much more with less energy. Similar things can be seen with water. In this case, we've got a graph of the overall use of water in the United States between 1900 and 1995. What this shows is that the two major uses of water, the use of water to cool power stations and the use of water for irrigation. In the rest of the world, use of water for irrigation is generally the largest use. But both of these have leveled off after 1980 as the price of water, the scarcity of water, and awareness of environmental issues has risen. So there's the reflexive process of humans is coming into play. There's a whole other set of curves called environmental Kuznets curves, which show similar effects for all sorts of air pollution. There are also some sorts of relationships which do not show turning points. But what I'm focusing on at the moment are the relationships which show turning points. And what we want to do is to map some of these country by country in order to look at environmental change as it's happening, rather than either the unreasonable optimism or the unreasonable pessimism of different positions at ends of the set of views on the environment. So this is a project that's underway. We've made a little bit of progress, but not a lot. I'm going to turn again to a different project, which is about poverty. I've done some work and written a paper on the how global statistics have been collected and what the gaps are in global statistics. Basically, global statistics start with merchants' account books in the Middle Ages. Then monarchs come along and they can see that they can gain power and authority by showing how much wealth and how much trade there is in their country. That's the beginning of statistical collection. In the early 1900s, in the 1990s in particularly, it gains much greater strength as all sorts of institutions, from the World Bank to the UNDP and many of the other UN agencies and the World Health Organization, begin to collect data from governments and distribute it. But by and large, as I've said on this slide, there are gaps. These include things that corporations and governments don't care about, and issues they want to ignore. Poverty and inequality come into this last category, so that there is very little systematic collection of data on poverty and inequality. We think that there's a big opportunity for distributed data collection around some of these gaps, because corporations and governments are not, unless there is very effective social movements, there are social movements worldwide which force them to collect that data, I don't think they're going to be collecting it. So we've begun looking at poverty stats, poverty statistics and processes, and getting beneath the nation as a unit of analysis, trying to look at the disparity of social outcomes for rich and poor, looking at maps, and looking at within-country mapping. We're hoping to collaborate with an institute at Columbia University, CSIN, that's been doing a lot of the work around this. Here's an early example of an attempt to graph some differences within countries. What this shows is the orange are under 5 mortality differences for the poorest 20% in each of these countries, and the blue are under 5 mortality rates for the rich in each country. Then that purple jagged line is just the ratio of the rich, the mortality rate for the rich and the poor. What it shows is there's a lot of difference, and I suspect that these data greatly underestimate those differences. But that's a first attempt at looking at some of the differences between rich and poor. This, coming from CSIN, is a much more sophisticated attempt to use poverty mapping. What this shows, this is the case of Bangladesh, and I happen to have done research in this area and up in this area of Bogra, so I know a little bit about this. What this is doing is interpolating from census data in order to make estimates of regional poverty. And I think it's hopeful. It's not by any means perfect. The dark green is very high levels of poverty, more than 45 to 50%, falling below a district-specific poverty line. The light green is a lower level of poverty, so it's a simple head count of proportion of people suffering from poverty. What has not been done yet is putting together this map with processes that cause this. The World Bank has been funding some of these maps because they want them as a check on government policy. We're less interested in government policy than in the processes, the reasons behind poverty. And what we're thinking of doing is putting together local household surveys which look at the process with poverty mapping. This is an example of some work done by Anirudh Krishna at Duke University, and he's done some exemplary work looking at local ideas about poverty and looking at escape from and descent into poverty. And here I've summarized the findings from his study on Kenya, but he's also done a number of studies in India, Peru, and I think half a dozen countries. And what these studies show is very striking. It shows that while there is significant escape from poverty, a lot of people, a lot of households descend into poverty in any period of 10 or 20 years. The reasons for descent, excuse me, the reasons for descent into poverty are fairly consistent, though they vary a bit from one region to another. Health crises are the main reason, then social commitments, in this case, funerals, and various sorts of vulnerability. Again, the reasons for escape out of poverty are also fairly consistent. Usually it's obtaining a job or establishing a small business. So these depend upon the reduction of poverty at the rural level, and probably in cities also, depends upon the diversification of the economy. So these sorts of studies give us information which greatly expand upon the poverty maps which are beginning to be produced. I'm going to skip over this. This is the process that Krishna uses for establishing poverty lines in order to work out who's escaped from. It's a very interesting, not perfect process, but it's pretty good, the best that's around at the moment. What we're trying to do then is to talk about putting together poverty mapping with the causes of poverty. We think we can do this at least through three processes: aggregation of household surveys, political economy analysis, perhaps through layers of historical, economic, sociological, and environmental data. We think there's also the important possibility of using a wiki, perhaps linked to our country pages, which brings in global data. This is still in the early stages. We haven't got a really good model for doing this, but we think that there is the potential to make good the gaps in corporate and governmental statistics by beginning to bring in a more democratic style of poverty mapping. These are both early examples, and I want to turn over briefly to Erin Middleton, who's going to talk about our conference in December.
Hi, my name is Erin Middleton, and I'm an undergrad in the Environmental Studies and Math departments at UCSC. And I'd like to talk with you and invite you to our upcoming conference on global inequality. We found that the debate of the impacts of globalization on poverty and inequality has been too narrowly conceived. And in the media and academia, they've focused mainly on income inequality and on the national level. So the aim of our conference is to broaden this debate by mapping global inequality at various scales, and also by applying a multidisciplinary study to broaden the debate to such topics as wealth inequality, health, and migration inequality. So the speakers, we have some listed here, will include Goran Thurborn from Cambridge University, Tony Sharrox from UN WIDER, and Nancy Birdsall from the Center for Global Development. And in addition, we'll be commissioning papers that will be used in a few different classes in the fall at UCSC. And at the end of the conference, we'll be publishing an atlas and also having online presentations available. We're really looking forward to it. So, thanks.
All right, let me wind up by just mentioning two challenges that we have. This project has been sustained by voluntary student labor and small grants. It's fairly difficult to sustain, but we think it's important because it has the possibility of aggregating the brainpower of a whole university and the university sector. We think it also has the possibility, as I've tried to gesture towards, of bringing direct and democratic data gathering in the way that Wikipedia and a number of other projects have shown. So these are the challenges, but I think the project is going quite well, and in the autumn, we're going to have 3 classes working on different commission papers, producing visualizations for the conference in December. So thank you all for listening. And we're happy to take questions.
I had a question regarding other sources online which also give so much access to this global data.
Yes, there are. They're mostly not very user-friendly. We noticed that the World Bank's database has adopted an interface very similar to the one we put in 2 years ago. So they've improved their database, perhaps in response to ours.
Yeah, and we have done a study of a number of websites which discusses global inequality, and Ben is aware of them, and Gapminder, Nation Master, World Bank poverty websites. So there are some websites which has those data sets as well.
What we're hoping to do is to load data from many different sources. We've run out of money to do that at the moment, so we only have one set of data up. But in principle, our database enables us to load many different sources. Yeah.
Second question, now analyzing the data is difficult because there's so many different options you can choose. For example, when you show, okay, this country, this kind of a metric, etc., bar graph. Have you considered automatically looking for interesting trends? In the sense, letting computers figure out, oh, there's a correlation between
That's a project that we are just actually beginning to formulate, the machine learning and pattern recognition, both for pattern recognition and anomaly detection, etc. So we haven't done that, and to the best of our knowledge and belief, none of these other websites have done it either. So that's the direction in which we are beginning to move. It's a good question. Thank you.
That's a very important subject, I think. So I wanted to ask if you also think about the possible solutions for this problems, or about reasons why this development occur. For example, because of certain top management decisions when big companies or so. Ask the question too, please.
Sorry.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, can you? Let me. Well, the question is have we thought about solutions to the problem of inequality and the issues of changing governmental and corporate decisions that lead to inequality? Is that a reasonable summary?
Yes.
Well, certainly we have, and certainly that's an underlying goal, is to try to get towards that. But the reality is that there aren't very simple solutions. So what we're doing is building up some background, some understanding, and we hope we'll get towards some solutions. If we have, as I've sketched out, the possibility of global poverty maps that have processes as well as outcomes, then we think it's possible that we can begin to say, this is the cause here. We did an initial exercise on Uganda. I had an undergraduate student doing a thesis looking at poverty maps for Uganda and building in household surveys. And what we could see at the end of that was war was a cause of poverty for large areas. There were other causes in other areas. So we're plodding towards that goal. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, great. Yes?
How much of your data is made up of the core census data, and is there any concern with
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the question is there other data apart from census data? And are we interested in verifying the accuracy of the data that we get? Is that a fair summary? So we've been very interested in this, and we have a website up which tries to summarize some of the international processes through which data is collected. And we think we've got the best summary of it. It's not as detailed as probably is needed, but what I think it suggests for us is that there's lots of errors. There are processes in various international agencies to try and reduce those errors. There are systematic problems to do with questions that are asked and omissions. And there is an enormous reliance on census data. So there's very little apart from census data. So one of the advantages of a global reporting system would be to try and bring in other sorts of data. So that's not a very good answer, but a beginning of an answer. Do you want to add to that? Does that meet your...
Yeah, I can understand, it's just enormous challenges, and there's nothing else beyond census data to work with.
What's happened is that over the years particularly since the Second World War, international agencies have developed relationships with government where they lay down some more or less agreed guidelines for what they want, and then they collect the data, sometimes coercively, sometimes less coercively. And the quality of the data is then subjected to various checks and comparisons, which are by and large transparent. So, for example, some of our students believe that the data may be systematically biased or systematically manipulated. We think that's less likely than the omissions that happen and the errors that happen, but we're getting some sense of how the data is collected, but there's enormous opportunities for collecting better data. I think we're done. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.